Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing a recap of what happened in the Western Region play-ins this past weekend. I'm also going to do a little tiny look ahead at the bracket for the playoffs. And also I want to talk a little bit about this week's content with the playoffs kicking off here in just under a week. Want to give you guys an update on what type of content you expect this week as we get further on. But let's talk first about the play-ins in the Western Region that we had this past weekend. If you saw my video on Friday or Thursday, whatever day it was, you would have seen my predictions. I predicted Florida to win against Boston and Toronto to move in as the first team to get up a locked-in spot, and then I picked Toronto to win against the Washington Justice in the lower bracket to be the second team to advance. So it's pretty close to what actually happened. Florida did beat Toronto in the upper bracket games, but it was Boston actually who was victorious against the Washington Justice in the lower bracket, and Toronto beat Boston to get in. So here's a look at the actual bracket that we had, as you can see it here. Not really a huge surprise, I think. I think most people, I did see some people say that they thought Washington would get in over Toronto. I didn't really believe it. I thought last week after Toronto beat Houston, to me that was a good symbol that the Toronto Defiant were in a pretty good place and that they probably would do well. So that was something that I wasn't that surprised by. Florida's looked good. Toronto's looked good. They were the two teams I thought were most deserving of this spot in the play-in tournament, and so they are the ones that made it. The games were pretty one-sided, as you can see, 3-0 for all the upper bracket finals, or whatever the Florida-Toronto finals match. I don't really know what to call them because it's a play-in tournament, so a different format, but Florida 3-1 Toronto in kind of the only somewhat competitive game of the weekend. It was a very one-sided play-in, so pretty much the entire tournament, so, you know, that is what it is. I just have not been impressed really by Washington or Boston in the latter half of the season. Washington's had their moments. Boston definitely had some moments, but Florida, Toronto, to me, were the obvious two best teams here, and the fact that they made it in is not a surprise. No real surprises here. Unlike the Eastern region, where we all kind of expected Guangzhou to make it, but they kind of choked against Chengdu, and then the Spark just kind of rolled over Chengdu in the second game. These, unfortunately, not quite as exciting as what you would have wanted. But hey, it happens. Sometimes you don't get the best games every single weekend. This weekend, games are all right, but definitely could have been a much better slate of games than what we ended up getting. So that's it for what happened. There's not really a ton to talk about. Like I said, the games were very one-sided. And it's kind of nice to see the results go the way that you mostly expected them to. I think that these two teams, Florida and Toronto, really did kind of rely heavily on their strengths. I think Hydron, of course, is the strength for Florida. I think Hisu is the strength for Toronto. I think Hoppa gets to play in a good meta, which I think has been, generally speaking, where the Toronto Defiant have looked better this season is when Hoppa gets to play over Muse, and they just have looked better in those situations more often than not. So to me, not really huge surprise that Toronto did well. Florida, not really surprised they did well. So I'm excited to see both these teams in the playoffs. I think that they're the most deserving of these four teams. So not really surprised to see them get in. Standings-wise, everything ended up working out the way you would expect it to. It was the teams that finished in the top 8 in the West and the teams that finished in the top 4 in the East are the ones that made it into the playoffs. And so with that, let's take a look at our playoff bracket because it looks interesting. It's very nice to see. So we're just looking at the top of the bracket right now. Obviously, we're not going to talk about any potential second round matchups or anything like that. But I think it's really interesting to kind of look at the teams. So if you look at the teams that made it into the playoffs and you compare it to the teams that made it into the midseason madness, it's the exact same teams. It is all the exact same teams. Seeding is obviously different than it was back then, but overall it's the exact same 12 teams that qualified for the midseason madness that are here in the playoffs. And so it's really interesting. I think the game I'm most excited for round one is Philly-London. It's the only game in the first round between teams from different regions. Hangzhou's playing Shanghai, but we've seen that before. Florida, Atlanta, we've seen. Toronto, Houston, we've seen before. But Philly, London, we haven't seen that yet this season. So I think that'll be interesting to see. And it's exciting to kind of get a cross-regional match. We don't get those all that often, unfortunately. I wish we got them more, but, we only get them every so often. So really, really, really exciting group of games we got here in the first round. I'm really excited for this year's playoffs. I think this is going to be a really interesting one because I think that in previous seasons, pretty much every year previously, there was a team that everybody pretty much unanimously agreed going into the playoffs was the best team and they were going to win. 2018 it was New York. Obviously, New York didn't end up actually winning, but that was a surprise. Everyone thought they were going to win. 2019 it was either Shock or Vancouver, but most people thought it would be the Shock. 2020 it was either Shock or Dragons, one of those two teams. Shock ended up winning. 2021 everyone knew it was going to be Shanghai. So I think this year's interesting because I don't think there's one definitive obvious favorite. This one 100% feels like it's going to come down, to the meta. It's going to come down to what people play, but you can make an argument for Dallas, for Seoul, for Shock, for Gladiators, for Shanghai potentially. Houston looked really, really good in the last tournament. Maybe they have a huge run here at the end. It's a really interesting one to kind of look at. I think this playoff is really, really interesting. I'll talk more about it, of course, throughout the week with my playoffs type of content that's going to come out over the next several days. I originally was going to do a power rankings video for the 12 teams that are still in for the playoffs, but I don't think I'm going to have time to get that one out and get everything else I want to get out. So we're going to not do a power ranking until the end of the season. Once the season's over, there will be a full 20-team power rankings that goes over all of those teams. But for the rest of the week, you're going to get a primer for the playoffs. So I'm going to talk about all 12 teams, their strengths, their weaknesses, what they do well, what they don't do well, where I think they'll succeed, where I think they would struggle, all that type of stuff. That is one of the things that I'm going to do for next week or this week. You can expect that. And then on Friday, because the playoffs kick off on Sunday, I'll do my bracket prediction. So you can expect that from me throughout this next week. Then in the final week during the actual playoffs, I'll probably have some Overwatch League content, like my awards and stuff like that. Will be next week when the playoffs and stuff are ongoing, and then when everything's all over, we'll sort it all out and figure it all out from there. But that is the content plan for this week. For the remainder of this week, that's the type of content you can expect to get. Is a lot of different stuff about the Overwatch League. With the Overwatch League season coming to an end, I'm going to focus very heavily on finishing up the Overwatch League season with content, and not focus super heavily on getting out the other non-Overwatch League content, the Overwatch 2 specific content. I'm going to wait on that until after we get this whole playoffs and whatnot behind us. So, that's what I am excited for. Getting ready to get into the playoffs. So that is going to be all for this video. Very short one for you guys, just letting you guys know what's coming. Really quick recap of what happened and also a look ahead a little bit. But that's going to be all. Like I said, let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on what happened this past weekend with the play-ins, if you were surprised by any of the results or not, or if it went about as you expected. And let me know what you're most excited for. If there's a matchup in the first round you're excited for. I'm also excited for Houston and Toronto. That's another good one. They've had a lot of great matches this year, so excited for that one, but that is really what I'm most excited for. So if you're excited for the playoffs and you want more content about it, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this over the next week, 2 weeks even, as we get into the end of the 2022 season. But that is going to be all for today. Hope you all enjoyed. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.